The sound of shattering glass followed by a gunshot tore through the morning quiet of Paradise, Nevada, and Delia Norton knew, without looking, that her father had finally pushed Samuel Oakes too far. She dropped the basket of eggs she'd been carrying from the henhouse and ran toward the saloon, her skirts kicking up dust with each stride. It was May of 1878, and Paradise had seen more than its fair share of trouble since silver had been discovered in the hills 6 months prior. But her father's drinking and gambling had made everything worse. The town had grown from a dusty crossroads to a bustling settlement of nearly 300 souls, and with that growth had come men like Samuel Oakes, men who didn't tolerate being cheated. By the time Delia reached the saloon's swinging doors, a crowd had already gathered. She pushed through the men, ignoring their protests, until she could see into the dim interior. Her father, Henry Norton, stood behind an overturned table, his face flushed and sweating. Across from him, Samuel Oakes held a revolver aimed at the ceiling, smoke still curling from the barrel. The mirror behind the bar lay in glittering shards across the floor. "That was a warning," Samuel said, his voice low and rough as gravel. "The next one won't be." "You can't prove nothing," Henry sputtered, but his hands shook as he spoke. "I can prove you've been marking cards for the past month," Samuel replied. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds. Everything about him spoke of violence held barely in check. "I can prove you owe me $200. And I can prove that if you don't pay up by sundown, you won't see another sunrise." Delia's heart hammered against her ribs, but she stepped forward anyway. "Mr. Oakes." Samuel's eyes cut to her, and she felt the full weight of his attention like a physical force. She'd seen him around town, of course. Everyone knew Samuel Oakes. He'd ridden into Paradise 3 months ago with nothing but a horse, a gun, and a reputation that preceded him by several days. He worked as a guard for the mining company, kept mostly to himself, and had a look about him that suggested he'd seen more than his share of darkness. "Miss Norton," he said, lowering the gun slightly. "This doesn't concern you." "He's my father," Delia said, moving to stand between the two men. She was tall for a woman, nearly 5'8", with honey-colored hair she kept pinned in a practical bun and green eyes that had looked too old for her 22 years, ever since her mother had died 5 years before. "Whatever he owes you, I'll work it off." Samuel's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Work it off how? I run a laundry service. I cook. I can clean, mend, whatever needs doing." She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly even though her pulse raced. "I'm a hard worker and I'm honest, unlike some." Behind her, her father made a sound of protest, but she ignored him. He'd been getting worse since her mother's passing, drowning his grief in whiskey and cards, and she'd been cleaning up his messes for long enough to know he wouldn't stop unless someone forced him to. Samuel studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable. The crowd had gone silent, waiting to see what he would do. Finally, he holstered his gun in one smooth motion. $200, he said. "At $5 a week, that's 40 weeks of work. I have a cabin needs cleaning, laundry needs doing, and I could use someone to cook proper meals instead of the slop I've been making. You do that, and we're square. But if you miss even one day, the deal's off and your father pays the price." "I won't miss a day," Delia said firmly. "Be at my cabin at sunrise tomorrow. It's the one on the north edge of town, past the old oak tree." Samuel turned his attention back to Henry. "As for you, if I catch you cheating again, I won't be so generous." "Understood," Henry nodded quickly, his bravado completely deflated. Samuel walked past Delia without another word, his boots crunching on broken glass. The crowd parted for him like water around a stone. Delia stood there, her legs suddenly weak, realizing what she'd just committed herself to. 40 weeks working for the most dangerous man in paradise. She turned to her father, who was already reaching for the whiskey bottle the bartender had prudently hidden under the bar. "Not another drop," she said sharply. "You're going to come home and you're going to stay there until you're sober." "Delia, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," she interrupted. "I understand that I just saved your life. Now move." The walk back to their small house at the edge of town was silent. Henry stumbled along behind her, and Delia felt the weight of responsibility settle more heavily on her shoulders. She'd been taking care of her father for years, but this was different. This was 40 weeks of her life given over to a man who looked like he'd shoot you as soon as look at you. That night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to her father's snores from the other room. She thought about Samuel Oakes, about the coldness in his eyes and the way he'd held that gun like it was an extension of his arm. She thought about 40 weeks of sunrise visits to his cabin, of being alone with a man who had killed before. She was certain of that. But she also thought about the alternative. Her father's body lying in the street, bleeding out in the dust. No, she'd made the right choice. She just had to be smart about it. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, it brought dreams of storm-gray eyes and the smell of gunpowder. The next morning, Delia woke before dawn. She dressed carefully in her most practical calico dress, pinned her hair up securely, and packed a basket with cleaning supplies and basic cooking ingredients. Her father was still asleep, and she left him a note telling him to stay away from the saloon. The walk to Samuel's cabin took 15 minutes. Paradise was still mostly quiet, just a few early risers heading to the mines or opening their shops. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, turning from black to deep blue, and the air held that crisp coolness that would burn off once the sun rose. Samuel's cabin sat alone on a small rise, a single-room structure made of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney. A lean-to stable stood nearby, housing a large bay horse that lifted its head to watch her approach. The cabin itself looked sturdy enough but neglected, like most things owned by men who lived alone. Delia knocked on the door, her heart beating faster than she'd like to admit. "It's open," Samuel's voice called from inside. She pushed the door open and stepped into dimness. The cabin's single room was sparse. A bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, and shelves that held supplies. Everything was functional and nothing more. Samuel stood by the fireplace, dressed in dark trousers and a shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing muscular forearms. He was younger than she'd thought, probably no more than 28 or 29, though his eyes looked older. "You came," he said, as if he'd expected her not to. "I said I would." Delia set her basket down and looked around the cabin. "When's the last time this place was properly cleaned?" "I sweep occasionally." "That's not what I asked." Something that might have been amusement touched his face, gone so quickly she wasn't sure she'd seen it. "Never, I suppose. I'm not here much, I can tell." Delia rolled up her sleeves. "I'll need water heated for washing. Do you have soap?" "Some." Samuel moved to the door. "I need to head to the mine. I'll be back around supper time. There's food in the crate by the door and coffee on the shelf. Help yourself to whatever you need." "What do you want for supper?" He paused in the doorway, looking back at her. In the growing light from outside, she could see his face more clearly. He had strong features, a scar that cut through his left eyebrow, and a hardness to his jaw that suggested he spent a lot of time clenching it. "Anything that's not burnt beans would be an improvement," he said, and then he was gone. Delia stood alone in the cabin, listening to his footsteps fade away, followed by the sound of a horse being saddled. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and got to work. The cabin was, as she'd suspected, in desperate need of attention. Dust coated every surface, the floors hadn't been properly swept in months, and the bedding smelled of horse and sweat. She started by opening the window to let in fresh air, then built up the fire to heat water. While it warmed, she stripped the bed and set the linens aside to wash later. As she worked, she found herself noticing small details about Samuel Oakes. He kept his guns meticulously clean, 3 of them hung on pegs by the door. He had a small collection of books on one shelf, mostly dime novels, but also a worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets that surprised her. His clothes were all in dark colors, practical and well-made, and under his bed, pushed far back, was a small wooden box with a lock on it. Delia didn't touch the box. Whatever secrets Samuel Oakes kept, they were his business. By noon, she'd scrubbed the floors, washed the bedding and hung it outside to dry, dusted every surface and cleaned out the fireplace. She made herself a simple lunch of bread and cheese from the supplies in the cabin, then started preparing supper. She'd brought dried beans from home that she'd soaked overnight, and she found salt pork, onions, and a few potatoes in Samuel's stores. She put together a proper stew, letting it simmer slowly over the fire. As the afternoon wore on, Delia found herself thinking about the man who lived in this lonely cabin. There were no personal touches, no photographs or mementos, nothing that suggested any life beyond the present moment. It was as if Samuel Oakes had appeared fully formed, with no past and no future, just this endless present of work and survival. She was checking the stew when the door opened and Samuel walked in. He stopped just inside the threshold, looking around the cabin with an expression she couldn't read. "It's clean," he said finally. That was the arrangement. Delia wiped her hands on her apron. "Supper's ready. Do you want to eat now?" Samuel nodded slowly, still looking around as if seeing the space for the first time. He moved to the table and sat down, and Delia served him a bowl of stew with bread she'd brought from home. She served herself a smaller portion and sat across from him. He ate in silence, and she found herself watching him despite her best intentions. Up close, she could see the weariness in the set of his shoulders, the lines around his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. He ate like a man who'd gone hungry before, steady and deliberate, wasting nothing. "It's good," he said after several minutes. "Thank you. You're welcome." Delia took a bite of her own food, trying to think of something to say. The silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable but not entirely hostile either. "Your father," Samuel said suddenly. "He's going to do it again." Delia's hand tightened on her spoon. "I know. You shouldn't have to pay for his mistakes. He's my father, I'm all he has left." She met Samuel's eyes. "What else was I supposed to do? Let you kill him?" "I wouldn't have killed him," Samuel said quietly. "Shot him maybe, put the fear of God in him, but not killed him." "And the difference matters." "Yes." Samuel set down his spoon. "I'm not a murderer, Miss Norton. I've killed men, I won't lie about that, but only men who were trying to kill me first. Your father's just a fool and a cheat. That doesn't warrant killing." Delia studied him, trying to reconcile this measured response with the violence she'd witnessed the day before. "But you would have hurt him." "Yes." Samuel didn't look away. "Sometimes pain is the only teacher people understand. Your father has been cheating miners out of their wages, men who work themselves half to death in the dark for a few dollars a week. That's not right, and someone needed to stop him. So you appointed yourself judge and jury. In paradise, there's not much law to speak of. Someone has to keep order, or this place will tear itself apart." Samuel leaned back in his chair. "The sheriff drinks more than he patrols, and the mining company only cares about keeping the silver flowing. That leaves people like me to fill in the gaps." "People like you," Delia repeated. "Gunslingers and drifters. Men who aren't afraid to do what needs doing, Samuel corrected. He stood up, carrying his empty bowl to the wash basin. I appreciate the meal and the cleaning, Miss Norton. Same time tomorrow. That's the arrangement, Delia said again. She gathered her things, acutely aware of Samuel's presence as he moved around the small space. I'll need to do laundry tomorrow. If you have anything that needs washing, leave it out. I'll do that. At the door, Delia paused. Mr. Oakes, why did you agree to this? You could have just taken the money from my father by force. Samuel looked at her, and for just a moment, something vulnerable showed in his expression. Because you stepped between me and a loaded gun to protect someone who doesn't deserve it. That takes either foolishness or courage, and I don't think you're a fool. I could be both foolish and courageous. That's what I'm afraid of, Samuel said quietly. Delia walked home as the sun set, turning the sky shades of orange and pink. Her father was sitting on the porch, nursing what she hoped was coffee but suspected was whiskey. How was it? He asked as she approached. Fine. I cleaned his cabin and made supper. Delia, I'm sorry. I never meant for you to, I know, she interrupted, suddenly too tired for this conversation. Just please try to stay out of trouble, for both our sakes. She went inside and prepared a simple supper for them both. They ate in near silence, the weight of unspoken things hanging between them. After cleaning up, Delia sat by the window with her mending, but she found herself staring out at the darkening town, thinking about a lonely cabin on the north edge of paradise and the man who lived there. The days fell into a pattern. Delia rose before dawn, walked to Samuel's cabin, and worked until evening. She cleaned, cooked, washed clothes, and gradually brought order to the neglected space. Samuel was usually gone by the time she arrived, and though he returned for supper, he rarely said more than a few words. Yet somehow, the silence between them began to feel less uncomfortable and more companionable. A week into the arrangement, Delia arrived to find Samuel still at the cabin, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. His face was pale, and he held his left arm stiffly against his side. You're hurt, she said, dropping her basket. It's nothing. Mining accident yesterday, just bruised. But when he tried to stand, he winced and sat back down heavily. Delia moved to his side without thinking. Let me see. Miss Norton, let me see, she repeated, more firmly this time. I helped birth half the babies in this town and tended wounds for anyone who needed it. I know my way around injuries. Reluctantly, Samuel unbuttoned his shirt, revealing a torso wrapped in bandages that were already showing signs of blood seepage. Delia carefully unwound the bandages, revealing a deep gash along his ribs that had been inexpertly stitched. Who did this? She asked, examining the wound. Company doctor, he's better with mining equipment than people. I can see that. The stitches were uneven and the wound showed signs of infection starting. This needs to be cleaned properly and restitched. It's going to hurt. I've had worse. Delia heated water, gathered clean cloth, and retrieved a bottle of whiskey from Samuel's supplies. Drink some of this first. I don't drink. She looked at him in surprise. Never, not anymore, not for 5 years. His jaw was tight, whether from pain or from whatever memory had made him give up drinking. She couldn't tell. Then this is really going to hurt, Delia said. She worked as quickly and gently as she could, cleaning the wound thoroughly despite Samuel's sharp intakes of breath. Then she restitched it with small, neat stitches, the way her mother had taught her. Through it all, Samuel sat rigid and silent, his fists clenched on his thighs. When she finished, she wrapped the wound with clean bandages. You need to rest today. The mine can do without you. Can't afford to miss work. You can't afford to die of infection either, Delia countered. Stay here, I'll make soup and you're going to eat it and rest. You're bossy, Miss Norton. Someone needs to be. She stood up, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Now lie down before you fall down." To her surprise, Samuel obeyed, moving carefully to the bed. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, and Delia busied herself with cooking, acutely aware of his presence in a way she hadn't been before. There was something intimate about caring for someone's wounds, about seeing their vulnerability. As she worked, she found herself talking, filling the silence with stories about paradise, about the people who lived there, about her mother and the herb garden she'd kept. Samuel listened without interrupting, and gradually some of the tension left his body. "How did she die?" he asked finally. "Your mother. Fever. It came on fast and nothing we did helped." Delia stirred the soup slowly. "She was the strongest person I knew. It didn't seem real that she could just be gone. And that's when your father started drinking. He'd always liked whiskey, but yes, it got worse after. I think he loved her so much that losing her broke something in him." She ladled soup into a bowl. "Can you sit up?" Samuel managed to lever himself into a sitting position, and Delia brought him the soup. She sat on the edge of the bed, close enough that she could help if he needed it, and tried not to think about how improper this all was. "What about you?" she asked. "Do you have family?" Had, past tense. Samuel ate a spoonful of soup. "Parents died when I was 12. Sister died 3 years later, been on my own since. I'm sorry, long time ago." But the flatness in his voice suggested it wasn't long enough. "Is that why you don't keep anything personal, no photographs or letters?" Samuel looked at her, and she saw the guarded expression return to his face. "Nothing to keep. Everything I had burned in a fire when I was 16. Lost the house, lost what few things my family had left behind. Learned not to get attached to things after that. Or people." The question slipped out before Delia could stop it. "Or people," Samuel agreed quietly. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the distant noise of the town waking up. Delia found herself wanting to ask more, to understand what had made this man so determined to keep the world at arm's length, but she sensed that pushing would only make him retreat further. "Thank you," Samuel said, his voice rough. "For this, for helping." "You're welcome." Delia took the empty bowl from him. "Now rest. I'll be here if you need anything. You don't have to stay." "I know." She met his eyes. "But I'm going to anyway." Samuel lay back down, and within minutes, exhaustion and pain pulled him into sleep. Delia watched him for a moment, noting how much younger he looked with his face relaxed, the hard edges softened. Then she turned away and went back to her work, letting him rest. She stayed the whole day, checking his wound periodically, making sure he ate when he woke, and keeping the cabin warm and comfortable. It was late afternoon when Samuel woke properly, looking more alert and less pale. "You're still here," he said, sounding surprised. "I told you I would be." "Most people don't mean what they say." "I'm not most people." Delia brought him more soup and fresh bread. "How do you feel?" "Better. Still hurts, but better." Samuel ate slowly, and Delia noticed the way he kept glancing at her as if trying to figure her out. "Why are you being so kind?" "This isn't part of our arrangement." "Do I need a reason to help someone who's hurt?" "In my experience, yes. People don't do things without wanting something in return." "Then your experience has been with the wrong people," Delia said firmly. "My mother taught me that we help each other because that's what decent people do. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that." Samuel studied her for a long moment. "You really believe that?" "Of course I do. Even after everything you've seen. Your mother dying, your father falling apart, men like me who make a living with violence." "Especially after all that," Delia said. "Because if we stop helping each other, if we stop being kind, then what's the point of any of it? We might as well just give up." That's remarkably optimistic for someone living in paradise. "Someone has to be." She smiled slightly. "Besides, I've found that optimism is just another form of courage. It takes bravery to believe things can get better when everything suggests they won't. You're a strange woman, Miss Norton. I'll take that as a compliment, Mr. Oakes. As evening fell, Delia prepared to leave. Samuel was moving better now, the color back in his face, and she felt comfortable that he would be all right through the night. "Tomorrow," she said, gathering her things. "You should still rest. Give it one more day. I'll think about it." "That's not agreement. It's the best you're going to get." But Samuel's tone was lighter than before, almost teasing. Delia shook her head and walked to the door. As she opened it, Samuel called out, "Miss Norton, Delia." It was the first time he'd used her given name. "Thank you, truly." She turned back, finding him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're welcome, Samuel." Walking home under the stars, Delia realized something had shifted between them. The walls he'd built so carefully were starting to show cracks, and she found herself wanting to see what lay behind them, dangerous as that might be. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Delia fell into the rhythm of Samuel's life. Sunrise arrivals, days of work and quiet conversation, evenings when they sat together over supper and talked about everything and nothing. Samuel's wound healed cleanly thanks to her care, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, he began to open up. She learned that he'd spent years drifting from town to town, taking whatever work he could find. He'd been a ranch hand, a trail guide, a guard for wagon trains. He'd learned to shoot because he'd had to, learned to fight because the alternative was dying. And he'd come to Paradise because he was tired of moving, tired of having nothing and being no one. "This is the longest I've stayed anywhere since I was 16, he admitted one evening as they sat on the small porch he'd built onto the cabin. "Usually I get restless after a few months. Start feeling trapped." "Do you feel trapped now?" Delia asked. Samuel looked at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "No, I feel anchored. There's a difference." The air between them felt charged, heavy with things unsaid. Delia was acutely aware of how close they were sitting, of the way the fading light cast shadows across Samuel's face. "I should go," she said, though she didn't move. "It's getting late. Stay for a while longer." Samuel's voice was quiet. "Please." So she stayed, and they talked as stars emerged overhead. Samuel told her about places he'd been, about mountains that touched the sky and deserts that went on forever. Delia told him about her dreams of one day having a garden like her mother's, full of herbs and flowers and maybe some fruit trees. "You could do that," Samuel said. "You could have that, maybe someday." Delia pulled her shawl tighter against the evening chill. "When my father doesn't need me anymore. He's getting better, isn't he? I haven't heard about him causing trouble lately." "He is," Delia admitted. "I think nearly dying scared him straight. He's been helping at the general store, staying away from the saloon. It's like he's finally waking up from a long sleep." "That's good." "It is." Delia hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind. "What happens when the 40 weeks are up, Samuel?" He turned to look at her, and in the darkness she couldn't read his expression. "I don't know." "What do you want to happen?" "I don't know either," she lied, because she did know. She wanted to keep coming here, keep talking to him, keep seeing the way his face softened when he looked at her. But admitting that felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to jump. 1 month became 2, and the people of Paradise began to notice the amount of time Delia spent at Samuel's cabin. There were whispers, of course, speculation and gossip. But Delia held her head high and ignored them. She knew what she was doing was proper, knew she had nothing to be ashamed of. Besides, she had other things to worry about. The mining company had brought in new workers, rough men who drank too much and caused trouble. There had been fights, a stabbing, and tensions were running high. Samuel spent more time than ever keeping order, and he came home most nights exhausted and on edge. "They need to hire more guards," Delia said one evening as she cleaned a cut on Samuel's knuckles from a fight he'd broken up. "This is too much for one man. Company doesn't want to spend the money. They'd rather work me to death than hire help." Samuel winced as she applied whiskey to the wound. "It's fine. I can handle it. You shouldn't have to handle it alone. I've been alone most of my life. I'm used to it." "Well, maybe you don't have to be any more," Delia said before she could stop herself. Samuel went very still. "What are you saying?" Delia's heart pounded, but she'd started this and she needed to finish it. "I'm saying that you have someone who cares about you now. Someone who worries when you come home hurt. Someone who wants to help." "Delia." Samuel said her name like a prayer and a curse all at once. "You can't care about me. You don't know what I've done, the things I know enough," she interrupted. "I know you're good and decent, even if you won't admit it. I know you try to do right by people. I know you're trying to build something here, a life that matters. I'm not a good man. You're the best man I know." Delia took his hand, the one she'd just bandaged, and held it gently. "And I think you know that I care about you, that I have for a while now." Samuel looked at their joined hands, then up at her face. "I care about you too. God help me, I do. But Delia, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be what you deserve. Then we'll figure it out together." She squeezed his hand. "That's what people do when they care about each other. They figure it out." Samuel lifted his free hand to her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. "You're so brave. You walked into that saloon and stood between me and a gun, and I thought you were either crazy or the bravest person I'd ever met. Now I know it's the latter." "I was terrified," Delia admitted. "But you did it anyway. That's what makes it brave." Samuel leaned closer and Delia's breath caught. "I'm going to kiss you now, if that's all right." "More than all right," she whispered. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and careful, as if he was afraid she might break. Delia kissed him back, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat racing as fast as her own. When they finally pulled apart, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I'm still going to mess this up," he said quietly, "probably. And I'll probably do things that frustrate you, but we'll work through it. You're certain about this, about me?" "I've never been more certain of anything," Delia said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. Samuel kissed her again, deeper this time, and Delia felt like she was falling and flying all at once. When they finally separated, both of them were breathing hard, and Samuel looked at her with wonder in his eyes. "I never thought I'd have this," he said. "Someone to come home to, someone who sees the good in me even when I can't see it myself. You have it now. You have me. And I'm not letting go," Samuel promised. They sat together on the porch until late into the night, talking and planning and occasionally stealing kisses like teenagers instead of grown adults. When Delia finally went home, she felt like she was walking on air. Her father was waiting up for her, and he took one look at her face and smiled. "So you told him then?" "How did you?" "Delia, I'm your father. I've known for weeks that you were falling for him." Henry Norton looked older and more sober than he had in years. "Is he good to you?" "He is. He's gruff and guarded, and he's been hurt so much in his life. But underneath all that, he's good." "Then I'm happy for you. And I'm sorry that my mistakes brought all this about, but I can't regret it if it led to you finding happiness." Her father stood up and hugged her. "Your mother would have liked him, I think. She always had a soft spot for strays and lost causes." "He's not a lost cause," Delia protested. "No, but he was lost. Until you found him." The next few weeks were some of the happiest of Delia's life. She and Samuel moved carefully, mindful of propriety and of Paradise's watching eyes, but everyone could see the change in them. Samuel smiled more, laughed occasionally, and the hard edges that had defined him began to soften. Delia felt more alive than she had in years, as if she'd been sleepwalking and had finally woken up. They talked about the future tentatively at first, then with more confidence. Samuel wanted to save money, maybe buy some land and build a proper house. Delia wanted her garden and a home filled with warmth and life. Together, they started to believe these things were possible, but paradise was still paradise, and trouble had a way of finding people. It was a Tuesday evening in late September when Samuel came home looking grim. Delia was preparing supper, and she knew immediately that something was wrong. What happened? There's been a cave-in at the mine. 3 men are trapped. Samuel moved to gather rope and a lantern. They're organizing a rescue and they need everyone who can help. I'm coming with you. Delia, it's dangerous. I can help. I can tend to the wounded, bring water, do whatever's needed. I'm coming. Her tone left no room for argument. Samuel looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but you stay back from the actual collapse. Promise me. I promise. They hurried to the mine together, joining the crowd that had gathered at the entrance. The situation was bad. A support beam had failed, bringing down tons of rock and timber. The 3 trapped men were miners who'd been working the deepest shaft, and no one knew if they were even still alive. The mining company supervisor was there, shouting orders and organizing teams. Samuel immediately volunteered to go in with the first group, and Delia's heart clenched with fear. But she kept her face calm, knowing that showing her worry would only distract him. Be careful, she said, gripping his hand tightly. Always am. Samuel kissed her forehead quickly, not caring who saw. I'll be back. Delia watched him disappear into the darkness of the mine entrance, then turned to help where she could. She organized the women who'd come to help, setting up a station with water, bandages, and blankets. The hours crawled by, each minute feeling like an eternity. Finally, voices echoed from the mine entrance. The first rescue team emerged, covered in dust and carrying an unconscious miner. Delia and the other women rushed forward, and she quickly assessed the man's injuries. Broken leg, possible concussion, but alive. The other 2, someone asked. Still trapped, Samuel said, his face grim. We found John, but the other 2 are behind more rubble. We're going back in. He didn't wait for a response, just grabbed fresh rope and headed back into the darkness. Delia wanted to call him back, wanted to beg him not to risk his life, but she bit her tongue. Samuel was doing what he'd always done, protecting people, helping where he was needed, even when it meant putting himself in danger. The second rescue attempt took even longer. Delia tended to the wounded miner, keeping him comfortable and monitoring his condition, but her mind was in that dark tunnel, imagining 100 different disasters. Around her, the crowd grew more anxious, and she could hear people whispering that the mine might collapse entirely. Then, just when Delia thought she couldn't stand it anymore, Samuel emerged again, this time helping to carry a stretcher. On it lay another miner, this one conscious but clearly in pain. Behind them came more rescue workers carrying the third man. Delia rushed forward, helping to lay out the stretchers and assess injuries. The men were badly hurt but alive, all 3 of them. It was a miracle, everyone said, that they'd been found in time. Samuel stood to the side, coughing from the dust, his face black with coal and his clothes torn. Delia wanted to go to him, but there were wounded to tend, and she forced herself to focus on the work. Only after all 3 miners had been transported to the doctor did she allow herself to approach Samuel. Are you hurt? She asked, running her hands over him, checking for injuries. Just bruised, I'm fine. But his voice was hoarse and he was trembling slightly. It was close, Delia. The whole section is unstable. Another few minutes and the whole thing would have come down. But it didn't. You got them out. Delia pulled him into a hug, not caring about the dirt and coal dust. You saved their lives. Samuel held her tightly and she felt him shaking. I was thinking about you the whole time, about coming back to you. I'm here, you're here, that's what matters. They stood there for a long moment, holding each other while the crowd dispersed around them. Finally, Samuel pulled back. Let's go home, he said quietly. They walked back to his cabin in silence, exhausted and emotionally drained. Once inside, Delia heated water so Samuel could wash, then tended to his cuts and bruises. He sat quietly, letting her work, and she could see the weight of the evening settling on him. You could have died, she said finally, voicing the fear that had been eating at her. I know. But I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. I know that too. Delia finished bandaging a cut on his arm. That's who you are. You help people even when it costs you. It's all I know how to do, Samuel said. Growing up the way I did, alone and angry, I made a lot of bad choices. Hurt people who didn't deserve it. I've spent the last 5 years trying to make up for that, trying to be better than I was. You are better. You're good and brave, and I love you for it. The words slipped out naturally, and Delia realized she meant them completely. Samuel's eyes widened. You love me. I do. I think I have for a while now. Delia met his gaze steadily. I love your strength and your vulnerability. I love the way you try so hard to be good even when the world hasn't been good to you. I love that you're willing to risk everything for people you barely know. I love you, Samuel Oakes, all of you. Samuel stood up and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a desperation that took her breath away. When he pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. I love you too, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't think I could love anyone, didn't think I had it in me after everything I'd been through. But you came into my life like a force of nature, gentle and brave and impossibly kind, and you made me believe in good things again. Then believe this, Delia said, cupping his face in her hands. We're going to build a life together, a good life full of love and hope, and whatever comes, we'll face it together. Together, Samuel repeated and kissed her again. That night, Delia stayed at the cabin until very late, just holding Samuel and being held, reassuring each other that they were alive and together and safe. When she finally went home, dawn was already beginning to lighten the eastern sky, and her father took one look at her face and smiled knowingly. The weeks that followed the mine disaster brought changes to Paradise. The mining company, shamed by the near tragedy and pressured by the workers, finally hired additional guards and improved safety measures. Samuel found himself with actual help for the first time, and the reduced workload meant he had more time and energy for the life he was building. He and Delia began making serious plans. Samuel had saved nearly enough money to buy a piece of land on the outskirts of Paradise. Good land with a creek running through it, and soil that would support crops and a garden. They talked about the house they would build, practical but with enough room for a family someday. I want to marry you, Samuel said one evening as they sat together watching the sunset. Properly, with the whole town invited and you in a white dress. I want that too, Delia said, leaning into him. Though I have to admit I care less about the dress and more about the man I'll be marrying. Still, you deserve something special, something that shows everyone how much you mean to me. Delia turned to look at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. Ask me then. Samuel slid off the porch and knelt in the dust, taking her hand in his. Delia Norton, you are the bravest, kindest, most wonderful woman I've ever known. You saw past all my walls and defenses to the man I was trying to be, and you loved me anyway. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you? You already deserve me, Samuel Oakes, Delia said, tears streaming down her face. And yes, I'll marry you. Yes to everything. Samuel stood up and kissed her, and the last wall between them finally crumbled. They were committed now, partners in every sense, ready to face whatever came next together. The next morning, Samuel went to speak to Henry Norton formally. Delia wasn't there, but her father told her about it later, how Samuel had been nervous and formal, asking permission to marry her even though he knew the answer already. "I told him yes, of course," Henry said, looking happier than Delia had seen him in years. "I told him I couldn't think of a better man for you, and I apologized to him for the trouble I caused. He said that if it hadn't been for my foolishness, he never would have gotten to know you, so he couldn't be too angry about it." Delia laughed and cried at the same time, overwhelmed by happiness and relief and love. They set the wedding date for early December, giving them time to prepare and to save a bit more money. Delia sewed her own dress, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, and the women of Paradise came together to help plan the celebration. Even the rough miners who'd initially been suspicious of Samuel contributed money for a proper wedding supper. Samuel bought the land he'd been eyeing, 20 acres with the creek and good soil, and started building their house. He worked on it every spare moment, and Delia helped whenever she could, the two of them creating something solid and permanent together. The night before the wedding, Delia lay in bed unable to sleep, her mind racing with excitement and nervousness and joy. Tomorrow, she would become Samuel's wife. Tomorrow, her new life would truly begin. She thought about the day she'd first seen Samuel, the fear and the danger, the way she'd stepped forward despite her terror. She thought about the weeks of slowly getting to know him, of watching his walls come down one by one. She thought about the moment she'd realized she loved him, and the moment he'd said he loved her back. They had both been so alone, both carrying their own wounds and scars. But they'd found each other, and together, they were building something beautiful from the broken pieces of their pasts. The wedding took place in the small church at the center of Paradise, with most of the town crammed inside and the rest standing outside the open doors. Delia walked down the aisle on her father's arm, and when she saw Samuel waiting at the altar, her breath caught. He looked different, cleaned up and wearing new clothes, his hair properly cut for once. But it was his expression that struck her most. The wonder and love and joy so clear on his face that everyone could see it. This man who had been so guarded, so closed off, was openly showing the entire town how much he loved her. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to love and support each other through whatever came. When the preacher pronounced them married and Samuel kissed her, the whole church erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration that followed was the biggest party Paradise had seen in years. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and even some of the roughest miners got misty-eyed at the sight of the newlyweds. Henry Norton gave a speech about his daughter's courage and kindness, and how glad he was that she'd found a man worthy of her. Samuel's response was shorter but no less heartfelt. He thanked the town for accepting him, and promised to spend the rest of his life making Delia happy. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Samuel and Delia finally managed to slip away from the party. They rode out to their new land, to the house that was nearly finished, and stood together looking at what they'd built. "Are you happy?" Samuel asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," Delia said. "Are you?" "I didn't know I could feel this way," Samuel admitted. "Content, hopeful, like I finally found where I'm supposed to be. You're supposed to be here with me, always." They spent their first night as husband and wife in the unfinished house, wrapped in blankets on the floor because the furniture hadn't arrived yet, but neither of them cared. They had each other, and that was everything that mattered. In the weeks that followed, they finished the house and moved in properly. Delia started her garden, planting herbs and flowers and vegetables, creating something beautiful from the bare earth. Samuel continued working as a guard but with reduced hours, and he started raising horses on their land, something he'd always wanted to try. Henry Norton, now fully sober and working steadily at the general store, visited them regularly. He and Samuel developed a genuine friendship, bonding over their shared carpentry skills as they built furniture for the new house. Paradise continued to grow and change around them. The mine became more profitable and safer, attracting more families and permanent residents. A proper school opened, and talk began about bringing the railroad through. The town was becoming something stable and lasting, growing up from its rough frontier roots into something resembling civilization. Through it all, Samuel and Delia built their life together. They faced challenges, of course. Money was sometimes tight, and there were days when the work seemed endless. Samuel occasionally struggled with his old instincts to close himself off when things got hard, and Delia had to remind him that he wasn't alone anymore. But they worked through everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing season. A year after their wedding, Delia discovered she was expecting their first child. Samuel was terrified and thrilled in equal measure, convinced he didn't know how to be a father but determined to try. Delia was calmer about it, though she had her own fears about bringing a child into the world without her mother there to guide her. "We'll figure it out," she told Samuel one evening as they sat on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over their land. "Just like we've figured out everything else." "Together," Samuel said, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "Together," Delia agreed. Their son was born on a cool April morning in 1880. Samuel paced outside while the midwife and several neighbor women helped Delia through the labor. When he was finally allowed inside and saw his wife holding their baby, tears streamed down his face. "We have a son," Delia said, smiling despite her exhaustion. "Samuel, we have a boy." Samuel approached carefully, as if afraid he might break something, and looked down at the tiny face of his son. The baby had dark hair like his father and was regarding the world with serious eyes. "He's perfect," Samuel whispered. "You're perfect, both of you." They named him Thomas after Samuel's father, and Samuel proved to be a devoted and attentive father despite his fears. He was gentle with the baby in a way that surprised people who'd only known him as the tough guard who kept order in paradise. But Delia wasn't surprised. She'd always known Samuel had this capacity for tenderness buried beneath his rough exterior. Life settled into a new rhythm. Delia cared for Thomas while continuing to manage their household and garden. Samuel worked, raised horses, and spent every spare moment with his wife and son. They were building something solid, something that would last. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Catherine, who had her mother's green eyes and gentle disposition. Samuel doted on her shamelessly, and Delia often found him in the nursery late at night, just watching their children sleep with an expression of wonder on his face. "I can't believe this is my life," he told her one night. "That I get to have this, have you, have them. You deserve it, Samuel. You deserve all the happiness in the world. Only because of you, you made me believe I could be more than what I was. You loved me when I couldn't love myself." "And I always will," Delia promised. The years passed, marked by small joys and occasional challenges. Paradise continued to grow, and Samuel's reputation evolved from dangerous loner to respected family man. He and Delia became pillars of the community, the couple others looked to for help and guidance. Samuel eventually left his guard position, focusing instead on raising horses. His calm, patient manner with the animals earned him a reputation, and people came from miles around to buy his well-trained horses. Delia's garden became legendary too, and she spent hours teaching other women about herbs and healing, passing on the knowledge her mother had given her. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning. Catherine was more outgoing, with a laugh that could light up any room. They were followed by another son, James, who was born when Delia was 30, and finally another daughter, Elizabeth, born 2 years after that. 4 children, a successful business, a home filled with love and laughter. It was more than either Samuel or Delia had ever dreamed possible when they'd first met in that tense confrontation in the saloon. Henry Norton lived long enough to see all 4 of his grandchildren born. He remained sober and active until a heart attack took him peacefully in his sleep at the age of 62. At his funeral, Samuel spoke about redemption and second chances, about how Henry had shown him that it was never too late to change, to become better than you were. He made mistakes, Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. But he owned them, and he spent his last years being the man his wife would have been proud of. That's all any of us can do. Try to be worthy of the love we've been given. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Delia back to the spot where they'd first kissed, the porch of his old bachelor cabin which still stood on the edge of their property, now used for storage. "I've been thinking about that first day," he said, holding both her hands. "When you stepped between me and your father, when you offered to work off his debt. I was so angry that day, at your father, at the world, at life in general. And then you appeared, this gentle, brave woman who refused to let me be what I was pretending to be." "You were never as hard as you pretended," Delia said. "Maybe not. But you saw through it all immediately. You saw me, the real me, and you didn't run." Samuel lifted her hands to his lips, kissing them gently. "These 10 years have been the best of my life. You've given me everything I never knew I wanted, a home, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving. You've made me better, Delia. You've made me whole." "We made each other whole," Delia corrected, tears in her eyes. "I was so lost after my mother died, so tired of just going through the motions. Then you came into my life and suddenly everything had color again. You gave me purpose too, Samuel. You gave me a future worth looking forward to." "To the next 10 years, Samuel said, pulling her close. "And the 10 after that and all the years that follow. I want forever with you, Delia Oakes." "You have it," she promised. "Forever and always." They kissed as the sun set, 2 people who had been alone and guarded and afraid, who had found each other and built something beautiful from their broken pieces. Together, they had become something neither could have been alone. Whole, happy, and unstoppable. Years continued to pass, bringing more changes. The railroad finally came to Paradise, transforming it from a frontier town to a proper city. Thomas went east to study law, the first in their family to attend university. Catherine married a doctor who'd moved to Paradise, and they built a house just down the road from Samuel and Delia. James took over the horse breeding business, showing the same patience and skill his father had. Elizabeth, their youngest, became a teacher, opening a school for girls who wanted education beyond the basics. Samuel and Delia watched it all with pride and wonder, grateful for every moment. They were grandparents 5 times over by the time Samuel turned 50. And their house was always full of noise and laughter and love. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a huge party. Half of Paradise turned out to celebrate the couple who had become something of a legend in the town. People told stories about Samuel's transformation from lone gunman to devoted family man, about Delia's courage in stepping between 2 armed men, about how their love had inspired others to believe in second chances and new beginnings. Samuel stood up to give a speech, his hair now gray at the temples and his face lined with years of smiles. Delia sat beside him, still beautiful, her green eyes as bright as ever. 25 years ago, Samuel said, his voice carrying across the crowd, I was a different man. Alone, angry, convinced that I didn't deserve anything good. Then Delia walked into my life, stepped in front of a gun without hesitation and offered to work off her father's debt. She could have let me handle things my way, could have stayed safe at home. But that wasn't who she was. She was gentle but brave, kind but strong, and she refused to let me be less than I could be. He turned to Delia, taking her hand. You saved my life that day, not from a bullet but from myself. You showed me what love looks like, what family means, what it means to build something that lasts. Everything good in my life comes from you. Our children, our grandchildren, our home, all of it exists because you were brave enough to see the good in a man who couldn't see it in himself. Delia stood up, her eyes shining with tears. You give me too much credit, Samuel Oakes. Yes, I stepped in front of that gun, but you were the one who agreed to my terms. You could have said no, could have demanded payment in full. But you didn't. You saw me, really saw me, and you chose to give me a chance. Everything we built together. You were never as broken as you thought, and I was never as brave as you believed. We were just two people who needed each other, who were willing to take a chance on something neither of us quite believed in. She cupped his face in her hands, standing on her toes to kiss him while the crowd cheered. I love you, Samuel. I loved you when you were gruff and guarded, and I love you now, open and happy in mine. Together, we've been unstoppable. Together, Samuel agreed, pulling her close. Always together. The party continued late into the night, filled with music and dancing and stories. Samuel and Delia danced together under the stars, just as they had on their wedding night, still as in love as they'd been that first moment when everything had changed. As they grew older, they slowed down but never stopped. Samuel's hands became arthritic, making it harder to work with the horses, so James took over more of the business while Samuel focused on training and advice. Delia's garden remained her sanctuary, though she had help now from Catherine and her daughters. They spent their days surrounded by family, watching their grandchildren grow and teaching them everything they'd learned. They told stories about the old days, about when paradise was just a rough frontier town and life was harder but simpler. They emphasized the importance of courage and kindness, of standing up for what's right even when it's scary. Your grandmother once stepped between me and a loaded gun, Samuel would tell the children, who never tired of hearing the story. She was terrified, but she did it anyway because someone she loved needed help. That's real bravery, not the absence of fear but acting despite it. And your grandfather, Delia would add, was brave enough to let down his walls and let people in. He'd been hurt so badly that he'd convinced himself he was better off alone. But he chose to trust, to love, to build a life with me even though he was scared. That takes courage too. On their 40th wedding anniversary, Samuel was 71, and Delia was 62. They celebrated quietly this time, just family gathered at their house for a simple dinner. 4 children, 12 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren filled the home with noise and joy. After dinner, as the sun set, Samuel and Delia walked out to sit on their porch, the same porch where they'd spent countless evenings over the years. Their bodies were older now, slower, but their hands still fit together perfectly. 40 years, Delia said wonderingly. Can you believe it? Best 40 years of my life, Samuel replied. Every single day with you has been a gift, Delia. Even the hard days, even the days when we struggled or argued or worried about money or the children. All of it was worth it because I was with you. I feel the same way. Delia leaned her head on his shoulder. We've built a good life, haven't we? A real legacy. We have. Look at our children, our grandchildren. Look at all the people whose lives we've touched. That sweet girl who married Thomas, she told me once that our story gave her hope that true love exists. That matters, Delia. We've shown people what's possible when two people commit to each other completely. We were so broken when we found each other, Delia reflected. Both of us carrying so much pain and loss. But somehow together we became whole. We became strong. We became unstoppable, Samuel said with a smile. That's what you always said. Together we were unstoppable. And we are. Delia lifted her head to look at him, her green eyes still clear and bright. I'd do it all again, Samuel. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I'd choose you every single time. And I'd choose you, Samuel said, kissing her forehead. Forever and always, I'd choose you. They sat there as darkness fell and stars emerged overhead, holding hands and watching their family through the windows of the house. Laughter and conversation drifted out to them. The sounds of life continuing, of love multiplying, of their legacy growing into the future. Samuel Oakes and Delia Norton had started as two damaged souls in a rough frontier town, had found each other against all odds, and had built something beautiful and lasting. They'd faced their demons, overcome their fears, and created a love story that would be told for generations. He had been gruff and guarded, she had been gentle and brave, and together they had indeed been unstoppable. They had built a family, a home, a life full of love and meaning. They had shown paradise and everyone who knew them what real love looked like, patient, kind, enduring, transformative. As they aged into their 70s, Samuel and Delia remained inseparable. They moved a bit slower, their hair turned silver, but their love only deepened. They'd sit for hours just talking or being silent together, content in each other's presence in a way that comes only from decades of true partnership. Samuel passed away peacefully at the age of 78, in his sleep with Delia beside him. His last words, spoken the evening before, were, "I love you. Thank you for giving me a life worth living." Delia grieved deeply but not desperately. They'd had 47 years together, years filled with more love and joy than most people experienced in several lifetimes. She'd known their time was growing short, and they'd talked openly about it, making sure nothing was left unsaid. She lived for another 5 years, surrounded by family, tending her garden until the very end. She passed away on a spring morning much like the one when Thomas had been born, with her children and grandchildren around her. Her last words were a smile and a whisper. "I'm coming, Samuel. Wait for me." They were buried together in the Paradise Cemetery, under an oak tree they'd planted together 40 years earlier. The headstone read, "Samuel and Delia Oakes. He was gruff and guarded. She was gentle and brave. Together they were unstoppable, together forever." Their children and grandchildren gathered regularly at the grave, bringing flowers from Delia's garden and telling their own children the story of how a confrontation in a saloon had led to the greatest love story Paradise had ever known. They spoke of courage and kindness, of second chances and redemption, of two people who had transformed each other through love. The house Samuel built stood for generations, eventually becoming a historical landmark in Paradise. The town itself grew into a small city, but it never forgot its roots, never forgot the stories of its founding families. And no story was told more often or more lovingly than that of Samuel and Delia Oakes, the man who'd been saved by love and the woman who'd been brave enough to offer it. Their legacy lived on not just in their descendants, who numbered in the dozens by the turn of the century, but in the example they'd set. They'd shown that it was never too late to change, that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that two broken people could make each other whole. They'd proven that courage wasn't about being fearless, but about acting despite fear, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let someone in. In the end, Samuel and Delia's story was simple. Two people met, fell in love, and built a life together. But in its simplicity was a profound truth about the transformative power of love, about the strength that comes from true partnership, about the beauty that can grow from even the most unpromising beginnings. He had been gruff and guarded, convinced he was better off alone. She had been gentle and brave, determined to protect those she loved no matter the cost. Together, they had been unstoppable, building a love that lasted a lifetime and echoed through generations. Together, they had found redemption, purpose, and a happiness neither had dared to dream possible. And in the end, that was all that mattered. They had loved each other completely, built a family that would carry their values forward, and left the world better than they'd found it. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and died knowing they'd made every moment count. Samuel and Delia Oakes had started their story in a moment of crisis and conflict, but they transformed it into a tale of enduring love and partnership. From that first confrontation in a dusty Nevada saloon to their final days surrounded by family and love, they'd shown what was possible when two people committed to each other completely. Their love story became legend in paradise, told and retold, inspiring others to believe in the power of second chances and the possibility of transformation. And though they were gone, their love remained, written in the faces of their descendants, in the house they'd built, in the garden that still bloomed each spring, and in the hearts of everyone who'd known them. Together, they had been unstoppable. Together, they had built something beautiful and lasting. Together, they had found their forever, and that was the greatest triumph of all.